Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jan Szerwiński. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski held high-level talks with government officials in Egypt, with migration at the top of the agenda. As Europe struggles with increasing migrant flows, containment at the point of origin is considered of paramount importance, with countries like Egypt playing a pivotal role. Can the tide of migration be stemmed despite powerful drivers such as poverty and conflict? And how can cooperation between European Union countries and their Middle Eastern and African counterparts contribute to the well-being of their respective societies? Joining us now is Łukasz Fyderek, head of the Institute of the Middle East and Far East at the Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello and good morning.
So let's begin by saying, why is Egypt so important in this whole puzzle? It is a country whose population includes about 9% of migrants from various sources. So how do the relations between the European Union and Egypt actually matter? How do they impact the current situation when it comes to stabilizing the flow of migrants?
Well, Egypt is a regional power. It is the most populous Arab country. It is the country with the strongest army in whole Africa, on the whole African continent. Hence, it's an important player, not only because of its large population and the fact that, which you've mentioned, that Egyptians are some part of the migration flows. It is an important player also because of its role in the neighboring countries. And probably one of the most crucial places when it comes to mass migration is Libya, where Egypt has a significant influence on political matters on the ground. In Libya, we have the frozen conflict currently and two competing governments. One of them, the one which operates in eastern part of Libya, is under strong influence of Egypt. And then we have obviously something which is very much visible in European-Egyptian relations as of recently, namely the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the Egyptian role in negotiations between Hamas and Israel, a hugely important role. That was that let's say vector of Egyptian policy was main topic of the recent talks between President Macron and President Sisi. When we think about Egyptian state in the Middle East and North Africa, we should see a highly influential, powerful state, but also a state with the large problems, particularly socioeconomic problems.
So essentially, Egypt is not only a country that's literally surrounded by conflicts, but you've mentioned Libya, you've mentioned Gaza, but there is also Sudan, right? So there are many countries from which migrants are making their way into Egypt, and some of them, unwilling to stay, try their luck at getting into Europe. So cooperation with Egypt has been one of the linchpins of the foreign policy of the European Union. How is it going at this stage? What do you think can be improved, for example? And can Egypt continue to play this role indefinitely, given that it faces both internal and, as we've mentioned, external pressures?
Absolutely. When it comes to the place or spaces for cooperation. Here we touch upon a delicate, European Union needs to hit a delicate balance, because obviously when we talk about border security, we refer to aspects related to internal security of Egypt. And Egypt is a non-democratic state. It's an authoritarian state dominated by the army. And not necessarily, to put it mildly, all human rights standards are respected, also in relation to the border security activities of Egyptian authorities. EU-Egyptian relations in respect of providing border security provision has been criticized for a long time from that perspective, from human rights perspective, by various non-governmental organizations in Europe. And it was also a topic of some debates in the European Parliament. Hence, that part of cooperation is a sort of a sensitive one, yet it is absolutely fundamental, as we've said, because of the huge size of the country and its large impact regional, to be held. Yet, as far as I read the situation, European Union tries to keep it at, let's say, technical level, not necessarily to publicize every aspect of that border security cooperation, to focus on things like training or competence development for Egyptian authorities, and this is the way the European Union tries to manage that relation.
So I'm assuming that the calculation made by European leaders is this: well, this regime is not democratic. However, the number of Egyptians escaping from the regime is much smaller than the number of people who would have made their way into Europe should the regime collapse, for example, or should cooperation with Egypt actually start floundering. So what the European Union is saying is, okay, we acknowledge that there are differences in governance, yet we also need to emphasize the crucial nature of this cooperation for our common good, in a way.
Absolutely. Namely, to rephrase what you've said, it is about prioritizing stability over the whole catalog of important for the EU values. But while emphasizing stability, European Union tries to somehow mention or tries to link some human rights related issues to or get the message to the Egyptian authorities. I didn't mention yet the large one large issue. Well, beyond let's say mostly technical cooperation on border security, we have a larger topic of stability of Egyptian state, Egyptian economy, and this is the constant and highly relevant topic of European-Egyptian consultations. Not only with Egyptian authorities are talking, not only with European, by the way, because their economy has been in a bad shape. They need a large investment packages, and they are getting it. They are getting it mostly from the Gulf states, from the Arab Gulf states, stabilizing, which are trying to invest or to put deposits into Egyptian banking system in order to stabilize the currency. To put those numbers, European support is about between 5 to 8 billion euro, and the other Arab states are contributing probably 5 as much. Currently to this project of helping Egyptian economy. And on top of that, we need to be also aware of the fact that Egypt is a country which is receiving massive American aid. Particularly, Egyptian army gets since 50 years that they are getting a regular annual large subsidies from the U.S. And now in this current with this current administration in Washington D.C., Egyptian army, which is basically the main force running the state, may be a bit uneasy about its future support from the U.S. and may look for Europeans to somehow supplement that role.
It seems this geopolitical unease is something universal, not just limited to any particular region of the world, with the Trump administration hoping to rewrite the rule book on international cooperation. Now, let's move on to the visit by Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, because it actually had two dimensions, right? Because he is visiting not just as the foreign minister of a major country in Central Europe, but also a country that's holding the presidency right now. So what would you say about what was agreed, and what impact could it have on the issue of controlling migration inside the European Union?
The range of topics going a bit beyond migration is wide. We touched upon some of them, mostly on European Egyptian level, but there is also a quite large catalog of Polish-Egyptian relations, which maybe they are not in the limelight, but nevertheless they are somehow important for both states. So I think that beyond the migration flows and that geostrategic issues, there is a large number of interests, both Polish interests in Egypt and Egyptian interests in Poland, which were discussed. There is a quite substantial economic exchange between the two countries. There are some Polish companies' investments in Egypt, and there are also quite numerous tourist flows from Poland to Egypt, stabilizing parts of Egyptian economy. On top of that, there is that issue of food security, which is again, we are coming back, which is relevant for Egyptian stabilization of Egyptian society, of limiting tensions and stresses hitting the most, let's say, the lowest strata of its society. And Poland plays a quite important role by stabilizing or by helping to provide or to sell some food products, especially in the light of Ukrainian Russian conflict or Russian aggression on Ukraine. Hence, the number of topics here is quite substantial, and some of them are indirectly related to migration, as we see.
Now, on a related issue, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has recently published a video in which he made an appeal to people thinking about migrating into the EU through Poland to remember that this is not an open border. There might actually be taken advantage of by regimes in Belarus and Russia. He simply said that you're not going to get through. So if you're thinking that this is an easy way, forget it. But this forms part of a larger campaign of getting through this sort of media noise to people thinking about migrating into Europe, people who might be susceptible to Russian propaganda as well, and dissuading them from this. How would you rate these efforts?
Well, these efforts are ongoing, and they are somehow done they've been around for, I would say, around 8 years since this first wave of big migration crisis. Not only done by the Polish government, done by a number of other governments, Hungarian government included in being very, let's say, direct in its messaging. So I see it rather as a process. When you ask me about my opinion about effectiveness of that, well, I think that it's a necessary effort, but it won't be extremely effective. From what we know from sociology of migration, the mass media coverage is it's not the dominant factor as we think about motivating people to migrate. The other factors matter, particularly social networks or social media networks, right? And people-to-people relations with the diasporas which are already in Europe, plus activity of or the different ways of in which people smugglers approach potential, let's say, customers or fragile populations or fragile demographics within that populations with their offers. And here probably there is a space to be improved in coordination with Egyptian authorities in order to not only communicate on bulk or via mass media, which is important, but yet it will have some limited efforts, but also by trying to identify and limit those social media related aspects of communication between vulnerable populations and those bad actors, namely smuggler networks, sometimes or oftentimes supported by the authorities of Russian Federation.
So the social media campaign goes on. Łukasz Fyderek was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm Jagiellonian University. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.